So, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very first panel discussion of Italian design icons. So, first of all, thank you for those who could show up today, given the, let's say, very last minute updates within the travel restrictions. We had a little bit of change of plans, but I'm very glad to see that there are many people connecting in live streaming, especially our university partners, who we thank very much for their warm support. So Jiaotong University, the Jiaotong Liverpool University in Suzhou as well, of whom we have some representatives here with us today. So without any further ado, I would also like to thank Professor Gisela Loeline, who was supposed to be here today, but who supported me with the moderation of this panel, and then Professor Davide Lombardi as well for the warm support. Now, without any further ado, I would also like to give a little bit more introduction of the esteemed speakers that we have with us today. So, as mentioned by my colleagues, we have Gianmaria Quarta and Michele Armando, who, as I know, met in Turin in 2005 while studying architecture, and then rejoined in Shanghai a few years later to found Quarta and Armando in 2016, correct. And then something that I also found out that I would like to mention is that Q&A has been awarded by AD Magazine as one of the most talented young firms in China last year. So anyway, I think like a warm applause is needed for this achievement, so congratulations. And then Juan Carlos Dall'Asta, who is Research Director in the Department of Architecture School of Design at Xi'an, Jiaotong, Liverpool University. And also thank you for joining us last minute, but we're very happy to have you with us today. And especially like what really marked my interest in your career is the strong international profile that I saw you have as a designer, and especially the experience experimenting with design tools such as the artificial intelligence and 3D video mapping digital performance. So I think we have a very strong panel to start our conversation about enduring materials and the art of sustainable architecture. My first question, and I would like to start with you, Gianmaria, is about the challenges and opportunities that from your perspective see for architectural practices in China.
Okay, well, thank you first of all for the introduction. Of course, yeah, I will speak from our own perspective of practicing here in China. Our company has been practicing for 5 years, and in these 5 years, we have seen quite a change in the market in general, but also in the way companies practice here. So I would say one of the challenges / opportunities is this ability to stay relevant and to keep up with the change, right? I mean, it's China is a very dynamic market, which is extremely thrilling to work on. At the same time, it's also quite easy to lose focus and somehow be kicked out by the competition, which is a healthy competition, but it's still something that needs to be taken into consideration every day. Then, of course, I mean, there are many opportunities, there are many threats. I would skip the usual ones, such as the communication and these kind of things, which I guess everybody who's been in China for a few years or months is aware of. I would say from my point of view, the thing that really helped us and also threatened us in the past, I would say, is the ability and the willingness to understand the culture, the local culture. And I'm not just talking about the history and so on, which is of course very important, but in general, being able to understand who we are talking to, why they're talking to us, and so on. These are all things that we also use to inform our design process. So each of our projects never starts with a random proposal without having a solid base of research. So we always start with a deep exploration of each project, each client, each requirement, and so on. So this is something that, of course, requires you to always be open to understand and to improve as well. So you cannot just find a solution that works for everything. But at the same time, I think it's probably the most rewarding thing, because especially in a very dynamic market such as China, there is a constant opportunity for renewing yourself according to different parameters. Of course, you need to be curious about these parameters. If you arrive here and you just expect people to understand you according to your own values and your own background, education, and so on, then I think in most cases it's going to be very hard, especially on the long term.
Thank you, thank you. I actually have already a few questions about this first comment that you gave, but I will keep them for the end. And I would also like to remind the audience, both on site and who's following us with the live streaming, that if there are any questions, we're gonna open a Q&A at the end of the panel discussion. Now, based on, let's say, these challenges and opportunities that you see while being in China, I would like to ask to Michele, rather, what are the main differences that you see, not only in working in an architecture practice and being the founder of one, but also within the architecture trends that are taking place in China compared to those that you can observe in Italy?
Yeah, well, talk about architecture trends, especially nowadays, always a tough topic, let's say, because it's really hard to say, like, in Italy is happening that, in China is happening that, in Chile is happening something else. Because since the beginning of the 20th century, I would say, every style, every trend start to melt and become always more globalized and international. Exactly. Even though I have to say, actually, if I can see a trend right now, before, of course, architecture was more vernacular and more related to the local craftsmanship and materials, etc. Then we went through 1 or 2 centuries of internationalism. Let's say about that. And now we are somehow going back to these local roots of material and craftsmanship. Of course, in a really different way from 2 centuries ago. But I can see that this is a sort of trend. And if we really want to talk about, okay, Italy and China, again, it's not easy to answer, but if we want to generalize a bit, we can say that before, probably most of the ideas were coming from the old Europe, mostly was like that. And here, China was the place where actually those ideas were becoming real, where the experiment were done. So, because of course, here things are going faster, they are making things, instead like for example, in Italy, everything is going a little bit slower. We have an office here in China and also an office in Italy. And even though we try to keep the same rules in both countries, of course, the speed is completely different, and also the relationship with clients and with supplier, etc. And saying that, I was saying that also here in China, anyway, right now, actually new ideas are coming out a lot. I would say exactly as the same as every other country in the world. And going back to this thing about, for example, local and international architecture, for example, this new trend in China, it's already 5 or 6 years, about like the Shanghai, so trying to create a relationship between the architecture and the landscape based on the artistic philosophy of China. It's something really local somehow and really related to history of China, but that is having a lot of success all around the world in terms of publication, of course, but I guess also in terms of real building that will come out.
No, I can imagine that being a big trend that, let's say, it's been in my mind for a while, because we see it a lot, especially in the fashion industry these days. So we see these more local brands emerging on the market and achieving really high rankings within the, let's say, overall Chinese fashion market industry. But it's interesting to see that also, let's say, within the architecture and design, this is a trend that you can observe and that you can actually feel.
Yeah, especially I would say we do mostly interior design. And sometimes with the pros and cons, sometimes the interior design can really be compared with fashion. You can see from a day to another one kind of material that started being used everywhere, from one side of the world to the other, really, like that. And this is really related to a sort of fashion style. For the architecture is slightly different. Also because, again, there is the matter of time, because interior design can be faster somehow, like fashion, while architecture is something that needs more time. So it's less fashionable, let's say.
I see. Okay, thank you. And something that I mean, basically answered my question. I would say the two keywords that would have popped in my mind anyway would have been the speed and the depth of relations that you also have with clients and suppliers. But maybe on this one we get back later, because I would like to explore it a little bit more. And now for my first question to Juan Carlos, I would like to stay on this kind of comparison that we're doing between China, the West, and more specifically Italy, you know, given all of our background here. But with you, given your strong experience in academic, I would like to focus a bit more on education. So more precisely, what do you see being the similarities, the difference, or how would you compare generally the education within the architecture and interior design industries between the West and China?
Yeah. So good afternoon. Actually, I had been teaching for more than 10 years in Polytechnic of Milan, and then 5 years ago I decided to move to China. Looking for what? Looking for a challenge. I came really without knowing how education was in China and how Chinese approach studying, for example, architecture. Was very interesting because we organized our first open day. So the open day we have external guests to come and to visit the university to understand. And I used to organize that in Milan, and then I attend my first open day in China, and I was completely shocked. In Milan, we have 2,000 to 3,000 kids coming to visit, trying to understand, making a lot of questions. And when I was here, no kids showing, just parents coming. So from my perspective, then I understood. And I understood that maybe in Europe, in Italy, the kids will have kind of more independence to choose their major they want to study. So that is giving them a natural motivation. Architecture is so challenging, right? So after that, I understand about their performance. So my perspective is coming from students' performance, right? So European or Italian students, even if also I was teaching an international program, they are kind of more of average, right? So performing relatively in a similar level, right? In China, I discovered both extremes. So I have students that they are really struggling, a big pain, and I assume are those that they really don't want to study architecture, but for a reason they need to be there. And then I have students that they really love architecture and they are excellent students. Their performance is even better than the one from Italian or European students. They are so dedicated, they are focused, they have passion, they can perform extremely well. This is in terms of performance. Another important difference is the approach to what means education and their approach to the professor and in their studies. This is, for example, changing. You should know that our university is a sort of pilot project, it's experimental, so I cannot talk on behalf of a traditional Chinese university, so we are already a sort of hybrid, right? However, we have very different students. For example, we have students performing differently in the undergraduate program because they come to our program and they will stay 2 + 2 years in Liverpool or 4 years in our campus. And then we have master program. The difference is quite enormous because in a way the students that will stay with us for 4 years, they have the time to develop a critical approach to architecture that is fundamental in our field. And then when I have the experience in teaching in the master program, having students from year one coming from, let's say, traditional universities around China, then you can feel the difference about their approach to studying architecture. It's very interesting because they are kind of waiting for instructions, right? Instead, I want to push them to go into critical thinking. That's the reason they sometimes are quite shocked into our teaching methodology, because they are expecting really to follow precise instructions. And my purpose, and I think my best teaching, is going when I ask them to think about why they should do things, right? So this is kind of the main difference. And I guess then this has an impact in industry and moving forward in design.
Thank you. I think it's very interesting, this also comparison that you did internally within the students, such as those who really get into the field because they are passionate about it, and those who maybe are not that passionate, but they have to, let's say, grow the passion within them to keep going in that. But why would you say, for example, let's say, rather, between the students that you see more passionate about this, do you also see the need from their side for such strict guidelines, or do you see them also better at this kind of critical thinking that kind of let them guide within their own projects?
Yeah, of course there's a straight relationship. So these more talented students also have, at least from my point of view, a higher level of independence, right? So because they have already a critical approach to architecture. I mean, then of course a relationship between student and professor, of course you need to guide them, but I always say to my students, my job is just to get the best that you can do, right? And we have kind of certain statistics that actually are very similar in China or in Italy or in Europe. Like, so if you have 100 students, normally you will have 10 students that they are in the wrong place, right? You can do your best, but no hope at all. You have another 10% that they are so talented, they can even do by themselves. So your guidance is really very small, just to, you know, to guide them into a few steps. So our real job is actually in the 80%, right? Because that on those, you really can have an impact. Anyway, the big difference that I see in these students is because architecture is so challenging, right? So you will need to get used to don't sleep anymore, to work by night, and to have, you know, problems with your friends and your relationship and whatever, right? So this is something that you need to understand. And if you don't have that passion, if you don't have that motivation, it's really, really, really challenging. It's something that you will struggle to do.
I see. Yeah, I can see someone nodding here based on experience, I guess. No, thank you very much for these insights. Now I would like to go back to Gianmaria, and I would like to start with a question that it's more related to Italian Design Icons topic for this year. So as you know, we're discussing about design and materials, and specifically for this panel discussion, we decided to focus also on sustainability, so the art of sustainable architecture. And based on this, I would like to ask you, what is your advice, based on your experience, to a design interested client on how to select a sustainable architect for a project, and also whether you do believe that choosing an increasingly, let's say, sustainable projects is relevant, especially in China, or how do you see this trend going?
Well, I would say my advice, obviously, to a client looking for a sustainable company would be to hire us, of course.
I like that.
Clearly. But let's imagine that I am retired and already successful, and that I have no interest whatsoever in new clients. So my advice would be, okay, so sustainability is something that requires time and research, okay? It's very much linked with materials and technology, of course. It's also the way, at least we do it, and I think the way that is developing in a very interesting way in China is that it's embedded in design. right? It's not just about using some materials which are sustainable in the end after you did the whole project, but it's about designing in a way that is sustainable as well. So I would say to clients, I would say, I think like 3 pitches done in a week in this case are not a good measure to select a company, because of course we can put up a presentation saying that we will do it in a sustainable way. But if a client wants us to embed technologies and thinking into projects since the beginning, that takes time. It's not something that that can be done hastily and just trying to convince a client. So yeah, I mean, this is the first part of the question, and of course, I do think that it's relevant and more important to go for sustainability. I mean, nowadays, compared with 5 years ago, and it's not just architecture and not just China. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to jump on a project without touching some issue about sustainability, right? This is for many reasons. But even just if you consider the most superficial level, which is marketing or branding for companies, you know, like nowadays you cannot anymore, if you're a public company or if you have any sort of interaction with the world, you cannot anymore say, yeah, I just poured concrete everywhere and that's it, you know, like it's become something people are sensitive towards. Mm-hmm. So we are being asked more and more, and we are very happy about this, because actually our very first project was done with 80% recycled materials. Okay. At the time, it was more for not just for a design philosophy choice, but it was also for a budget because it was cheaper at the time. It was free, yeah, it was free to be
so
specific.
So cheaper indeed.
Yeah. So, but for us, it's something we always try to do. So it is, I think, becoming more and more important and relevant today.
If I may, what I would like to understand is also, I mean, I can imagine that especially when you have big projects with, you know, companies that also have to kind of respond to their audience, stakeholders, so they have to, let's say, show an interest towards sustainability. But for those projects that you work with smaller companies or companies that do not necessarily have to show off their green impact on the project that they're doing, do you still see an interest in sustainability in that case, or is it rather for the bigger companies that have to kind of demonstrate that they're working towards that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we always try to propose in the very beginning sustainable solutions, I would say. Sometimes it's sustainable materials, sometimes can also be sustainable processes in the design while we design. Like now, for instance, we are 2 examples. We are doing one retail store. We are working on that these days, and that is all about materials. So we are trying to do a 100% recyclable store. So the whole fit out of the store can be after use used to be recycled in other products. Now, I cannot mention which products because then it's relevant to the client, but can be recycled by the client. Another one we are doing is an office space which is just assembled and not built. So there is very little hard decoration, what you would call hard decoration, which is something that after that you need to demolish. Is something that for 99% of the product can be disassembled, and then it can be reused or sold by the client and put again into commerce.
Okay, I will take the lead on this mention of materials to go to the second question to Michele, and this is a question that Professor Gisela Leuland prepared, and I think it's very suitable also to the comparison that we did with fashion earlier. So she, helped me prepare this question about materials from your perspective, not only, just the professional one, but also the personal one. When you observe materials, what would you say are the materials that are in and which ones are out? And also, what should we expect for the future? So which kind of materials do you really see emerging in the use of, for the use that you have to do in your upcoming projects?
Okay, well, I cannot honestly give you a list of great materials right now, like, okay, there is this, and this. Honestly, I think, but I think I can talk for both of us, it's a little bit part of our philosophy, as Gianmaria was already saying. It's not about which material you're using, but the fact that tomorrow you can use it again. So you can even use the most rare material in the world, but if you use that material for 100 years, then is automatically something sustainable. Maybe I can go a little bit more in detail, like with these few examples that Gianmaria was talking about. Like, for example, exactly our first project was this sort of Brazilian bar. We wanted to recreate a sort of informal feeling, like a little bit like it's called Barraco, was called Barraco. So
it's the one that you showed last year at Italian Design
yeah, exactly. It was our really
I
first
love that
project.
one,
But
yeah,
it's always a good case because in that case, we went to demolition sites here in Shanghai. We took over some windows, doors, metal sheet and stuff, and put it on the ceiling to recreate this sort of informal environment. And that's exactly the kind of reuse I was talking about before. In those cases was exactly wood and metal. With this office that we are building right now, we are actually trying to use a flooring. It is from this brand. It is not here today, so I don't know if I can mention. But anyway, it's from this brand that it is not Italian.
Then go ahead, it's okay.
Okay, it's called Bolon. It's
Okay.
a Swedish brand. No, what is really good about this brand is like that we are usually used for about the typical carpet for offices. Sometimes a really sad carpet. They are actually making plastic carpets with recycled material. And the good thing is that this is made in squares, and the good thing is that you can take it off and use it again in your next space because it's not glued to the floor. Then there are some other sustainable technologies they are using, really interesting. And the good point is that the cost is pretty good because especially in interior design, the issue that we had until I would say a couple of years ago is that was a sort of almost fancy and luxury thing, you know, because it's expensive in terms of, it was expensive in terms of money and also in terms of time. Yeah. Now we have this, okay, that actually costs less than concrete, less than a wooden floor, so material that can be reused, and that's really important. This is just one example, but if you use it also for the storage, etc., means that exactly you can take that office and tomorrow, when you will move away, you can have the same materials and storage and stuff in another place. And this is really important because at the end is an answer of a society trend. I mean, we are changing, COVID helped us on that too, but we are changing so faster, and every need that we have, and also the companies, they are changing so fast, and the needs also changing so fast that actually the idea of reuse, I think it's quite important right now, more than the material itself.
That's very interesting. I also see, you know, same as we see local. At some point.
Yeah, also because especially in the Chinese market, we feel that everything at the end is sort of temporary. If it's a restaurant, a office, or because especially here, things are changing so fast, that most of the time our clients' request is really like, in 2 years, I don't know if my company will be 100 or 20, if we will be here or in Guangzhou or in Beijing, we don't know. So we need something that can be flexible.
I guess this is also something that we could mention as one of the biggest differences. For example, you know, when you speak to clients about this, it's that you were
Correct.
okay. That's Interesting. And I will also continue on talking about materials with Professor Dall'Asta. And in this case, materials within education. So materials in a classroom, how do you approach them? How do you teach them? And what is the feedback that you see from your students about it?
Yeah. Before going there, if I want to comment about, because then it's related, right, about this sustainability. So when we have discussions about curricula development, we have this kind of discussion because always there's coming this proposal like, okay, let's maybe address the topics into sustainability, and with Gisela we have this discussion. And I agree, and we agree on that. Like, we do believe that this kind of even useless to discuss about sustainability because should be something that is in the project. It's not something that has to be something like extra, right? Should be in the normal practice of design to be sustainable. So there's a lot of confusion. Yeah, it's becoming the power of marketing, the power of branding, a way to sell more products, a way to sell more spaces or architecture or whatever, right? So maybe it's interesting to think a little bit about the real meaning of sustainability that actually is all related to energy. This is a real meaning of sustainability. So I want to quote one of my favorite writers. He's a landscaper, he's French, Jules Clément, and he wrote some really wonderful books about the Jardin Planétaire, the moving garden, and also the Manifesto of the Third Landscape. And he's describing something very simple that I always repeat to my students as an example. He's speaking about the necessary energy to do things. So he's shifting the topic into ethics, into responsibility, right? So we have the technology, we have the finance, we have the opportunities to do things, right? So he's making this example. You can have a palm in the middle of the desert because you can take the water, we have the technology, we have maybe some very, very rich person that wants to do that, and we can do that. The question is not what we can do. The question is why we are doing things, right? So it's in these terms of energy that we should focus into the topic. So all what colleagues were already describing, I think is very interesting because it's related to that. It's related more to the process, right? Is how much energy we need to produce that and how much energy will take to eventually destroy or transform. This is a very simple, sorry for saying maybe simple things, but
No, necessary.
What you said is really correct, that there is still a lot of confusion. I mean, sometimes something that is happening also with some of our clients. Sometimes they think that sustainable means to have a green wall somewhere, you know, that actually is the less sustainable element in the world, like to have some plants of a green wall or something like that. Actually, what you said is really correct. We need to understand, we need to start from the energy that you need to actually produce that. And if we really need that, that's the big question, like the palm example you just said.
Then trying to answer to your question instead, I want to take from another perspective, and it's the topic about materiality, right? So this is another problem of education and architecture, or perhaps a general problem of architecture and design. So our students are normally used to work in a virtual environment, right? So this is actually kind to producing a sort of reaction from their side that they have this distance from reality, right? So they are not used to really think through materials, yeah? Because they have wonderful design tools for modeling, rendering, whatever, but it's always something really virtual. So in architecture, in all history of architecture, there has been a very strong and clear relationship between design process, materiality, and architectural language as a result, right? But this is something that kind of is missing in this moment. So in our university, what we do, we organize workshops, activities, and we bring students to touch with their hands the materials. So for example, to work with concrete, with wood, with acrylic, with whatever. You should see their faces are the happiest in the world. It's like, wow. And Carlos, concrete is so heavy. I say, yes, yes, yes. This is what I want. So now you know it's heavy. Something like this, right? So it's a sort of human being natural necessity, yeah, to this physicality, right? So for example, when we are teaching, we know that if a student is drawing by hand something, there's a process in our mind, this is related to neuroscience, that this will have a stronger impact in your memory. You will remember much better the things that you are doing or learning using your body, right? Rather than just virtual. So this is the kind of contact that we are looking to provide students to have this understanding of materiality, not just in terms of sustainability and responsibility as professionals, but also in terms of you know, an open discussion between this excess or necessity of virtual environment and then going back to the physical environment.
Thank you. I think, you know, the concept of materiality, it's, let's say, kind of new to me personally, but it resonates with the other trends, you know, also on the architecture and interior design. Now, talking about rather from a, let's say, more business or commercial perspective, I would like to go back to Gianmaria and do this, let's say, last round of questions more focused on what's coming next. So I would like to discuss with you three, you know, from different perspectives, but starting with you about how sustainable do you see, you know, architecture practices in China being, and also because of, you know, the mentions that we did before about China and Italy, why did you even move to China? How this, you know, how did this China interest came to you guys to come here and start your business here?
Okay, starting from the first question, I think local companies are doing great. Honestly, of course, it's a difficult question. It's very complex because there are many levels of designing and building in China. Overall, I think there is a few trends happening in China and developed in China, which are extremely interesting. This goes back to what Michele was mentioning before about building in a certain way that considers local materials or renewable technologies. And this has been developing in the past 20 years, I would say, 10 to 20 years. We have great examples of masterpieces, I would say, of industrial renovations in China, which is one example, for instance. New buildings, I mean, Wanshu, Pritzker Prize winner architect from China, he was one of the first ones in China to reuse bricks from demolition sites, tiles from demolition sites, and so on. Of course, we are talking about a tiny percentage, but I think it's still very relevant. I mean, without going too much back into history, but every big change in architecture has started from very small niche practices, which at the time were seen as marginal, whereas now they've been deployed and surpassed by great lengths. So I think what's happening in China is extremely interesting, and it's also very interesting not just for China, but it's very interesting for whatever is happening in the world. Because again, I think, for instance, if we go to Europe or US, I think sustainability has become more and more linked with performance and how to measure this performance. So if a building is certified green, then it's sustainable. So what happens here, for instance, you have multinational companies who renovate their whole office using Carrara marble that has been shipped here and with a extremely high cost and everything, but still, because of the parameters, they can get a green certificate, right? And this is not sustainable at all because it doesn't consider the whole life cycle of materials. In China, what's happening is a different thing because it's happening in a much more contextualized and localized way, which I think it's interesting, and it could be a direction also for other countries, because it's something that is been developing here out of necessity. I think we're still far away from China being a sustainable leader in terms of construction, at least, because the numbers are what they are. I mean, this is a very limited amount of practices compared with the whole country. But I think they're setting the example.
No, I see. And the reason why I also asked you the second question about, why from Italy to China is also related to this, because, many see China as a country of opportunities. And given also your interest in sustainability and in, let's say, fast developing, the speed that, we've been mentioning since the beginning, that's also why I would be curious to understand if these kind of considerations were part of the reason why you decided to move to China, to have probably the opportunity to explore these practices from a, let's say, more closer perspective.
Well, yes. I mean, I don't know how conscious that was, but for sure, as Juan Carlos mentioned, looking for challenge was a very big component. I mean, because Europe is a very comfortable place to be, right?
Right.
But at the same time, it can also become very, very static, right? It can be, you can feel lack of something new going on, right? So, of course, if you ask me 8 years ago, what do you expect to find in China, I wouldn't be able to articulate in such way. But the reason why I stayed in China for sure is that, meaning I see every year, among all the challenges that are presented, I see every year new opportunities to exploit here for myself, right? For improving my own career.
I see.
And personal development as well.
Yeah. And staying on this, maybe I would like to discuss with Michele about, we're talking also about architectural practices from a, let's say, business perspective. And the innovation, the speed, the opportunities, something that comes to my mind now, it's digital. So I would like to understand from your perspective and from being in China, which is a highly digitized country, how is digital, if in any way, impacting your work, and if you see this having an even bigger impact in the next years, short term especially?
I have to say, from our, let's say, office point of view, we need, of course, to use digital softwares. Of course, that's, of course, you need. But we are kind of a really manual, let's say, office. We really like, a little bit as he was mentioning before, we really like to find ourselves during construction site and stuff, and really touching material. So we use the softwares to do something a little bit more challenging, sometimes like parametric sealing or something like that, and was an interesting experiment, but I wouldn't say that that's our direction. Sometimes if we go back to the sustainability, sometimes this kind of software are actually going exactly in another direction in terms of course, they can calculate the exact amount of material that you need, the minimum amount, and that's somehow sustainable. But sometimes these softwares are creating some sort of some sort of so strange shapes or parametric shapes or something like that, that automatically is not something sustainable, and it's not something we are looking for right now, honestly. If the question is also like if software will help to have more sustainable architecture. For sure, I think so. I mean, we are always seeing, it's already more than 10 years that we are seeing these 3D printed houses. But as everything, there is also a bad side of it. Like, for example, these 3D printed houses is giving a little bit of lack of creativity, at least for now. So you need to follow a pretty standard catalog of shapes, etc. That for an architect, of course, is a pretty bad constraint, let's say.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
That would be for the 10% of the students who are not very passionate, so that would give like an easier way to get to the result. Actually, I would also like to because digital, it's interesting, and I do believe that also the students who are following us find the topic relevant for their studies. And in your experience, from an academic perspective, you focused a lot on, as we said, artificial intelligence and 3D planning. And is this something that, would you say, is still attractive to students, especially here in China? Or rather, do you see more students similar to them, wanting to be on site, touching material, so really being more present and feeling rather than switching completely digital? How do you see even the academic interest within your students between these two different approaches?
I think the students are interested in both ends of the spectrum, right? So in one hand, of course, because their natural digital environment, they are very attracted. Even if artificial intelligence, they are not yet there, so they are oh, what is it? This artificial intelligence is my competitor, or kind of, right? So it's something that we are really exploring. And on the other hand, this necessity of the physical things to get completely dirty in our lab with a concrete, because perhaps in their mind as an architects, they have this really necessity to learning by doing, right? That is so important. About artificial intelligence, we are doing these experiments, and it's to use artificial intelligence in the design process. That is something really interesting. Because when you are designing, you will face that moment. You have what we call it a white paper moment, right? When ideas should come from somewhere, but you don't know where are coming from, and something needs to happen, especially if you have a deadline or you need to provide a design idea. In that case, with students, we are doing this experiment. So they are working with artificial intelligence, and actually, artificial intelligence playing the role like a design body that is giving you suggestions. Hey, Gianmaria, what do you think about this? Is a good idea? And you can say no. Okay, look at this. Artificial intelligence, of course, can provide you thousands of ideas. And then it's your interpretation that is going to be the one that is really going to take it or not take it, right? But in the moment, at least from our educational profile, we move to both things because both are important. In one hand, we want really to experiment the most innovative, like this one, or in the other hand, we want to keep the idea to, for example, physical model making. We want to keep it. It's important as a design process, sketching, drawing, and doing things by hand.
Okay. And now I would like to ask the same question to the three of you, because of course you are we can start from you and then we go back. Because I was thinking, of course you are a research director and you guys also work with the Xi'an Jiaotong Liverpool University, so you've been in a classroom more than once. I do find interesting, especially for our audience, to understand from your perspective, what would you say are the skills, or let's say let's focus both on skills and challenges. So let's keep it real. So the skills that you see students needing to acquire to succeed as architects, as interior designers, and also what are the challenges that they should expect coming out from university within the next couple of years, let's say.
Yeah, this is a very nice question. So as I were mentioning, the speed of progress, we cannot control it, right? So even if you learn one software, then it's coming another software and whatever. So what is the thing that they just can learn in that moment is how to design, a design methodology, a design process, a sense of responsibility, right? This is the thing that they learn there. Then about specific skills, of course, they will need to learn new tools, new softwares, and whatever. This is going to continue changing. But that philosophical approach, that understanding of design, which is our role, our professional role in society, is something that can just come from that moment of education, right? And challenges many, and of course they, will face many disappointments in their career, and many requirements. Perhaps they will feel to not be ready to practice, and the requirements are completely different from their learning. So the advice that I give always to my students when they finish is to never stop dreaming and just to go further, right? To do as more as they can, to study as more as they can, to go for a master, to go to a PhD, to do as more experiences as they can, and never stop dreaming.
I like that. I feel like very often students are feeling disappointed at the first challenges, but I think it's important, especially from your side, being in touch with students so often to remind them that after the first challenge, there's going to be another one, but at least you're going to get to the next one.
Yeah, but then there is also another really big challenge that is for the student and is also for us, that we don't know what will be the role of an architect in 10, 20, 30 years. If we still be useful, let's say, as we are right now and what we are doing right now, probably the profession will somehow change. And so it's all about the mindset that you learned during the university more than the practical skills, probably. So you need also to adapt to the environment that you have around, also the working environment that you have around. So while you were asking this question, actually I was thinking again about my university experience when I was younger. And for example, in my case, I definitely was not in that 10%. I was not in the other 10%. I was definitely in the 80%. My first year of architecture was a nightmare. I really hate it. Because, well, I was coming from a really technical university. And of course, the first year of architecture, you're dreaming about skyscrapers or amazing villas and stuff. First thing that they put in front of me was like a urban regulation. I was like, so this is, and so it was not really nice. But actually what really changed my mind was the next year. I was almost going to leave the university, really. But the second year, actually, we have a really good professor that bring us more like on exactly construction side and stuff like that. And I have to say that I learned definitely more from a construction site workers than from the first year professor of urban theory or something like that. I found more interesting in architecture from from some books, let's say, and from that the point of view completely changed in architecture. But I was sure when I finished the university that I was not ready for anything. I realized that I changed my mindset, my way to not just read architecture, but to read the world in general. But I was not ready for anything. I don't know if you had the same feeling, but I think it will be the same right now also for the student. Okay, you know how to use AutoCAD or Rhino, but yeah, that's just a temporary tool. So, I mean, probably in 5 years, that will not be what will save your life, let's say. So it's more about exactly the mindset and find the right professor who will teach you that.
Okay, so basically, anyway, the importance of a mentor. So having, yes, someone to guide you through, I mean, understanding what you're good at, making you discover what your real passion is, and then help you to find the right way to get onto it.
I absolutely subscribe to this. So for me, it was a different but similar experience as a student. I would say, okay, so just not to repeat the same, I would say two things, like for students who understand that architecture is a profession, I think it's very important. It may sound very, very simple, but I mean, a lot of my colleagues, at least at the university at the time, me included, thought that architecture was just like a good compromise between something artistic and fun, something a bit scientific, so you're not guilty, too artistic, right? But in the end of the day, it's a profession, and it's a profession which is very linked to the real world, much more than other professions. So I think this is one thing that that students should keep in mind without limiting themselves. And the other thing I would say, something that helped me at least, and having been a student, having had some teaching experience, not as depth as Juan Carlos, of course, plus being practicing architecture, I would say one thing that I observed in students, which I found very interesting, is the fact that certain students, they tend to naturally have an inclination for something. Like there is something that they tend more towards, whether it's more towards materials, some students are more towards research, so on. I think finding what you like, in which way you like to do things, and kind of sticking to that and developing those things more is important, because a lot of times we believe, as designers, we believe we should be that designer, right? We should be, okay, I want to be like that guy that is my hero. But not necessarily you have the personal attitude to become exactly that person, right? So whenever there is the possibility of developing your own language, recognizing that and going for that. And it's very difficult to do it. But not just for designers, but in general for creative people, I think. Like to be 100% honest with yourself, especially when you're a student, and going like, yeah, okay, this is not what I imagine, but I can see I'm good at this because of the person I am.
I see. With this question, I mean, I would have many others, but maybe I should check with the audience if there's anyone having a question.
I think I'll open up the questioning.
Go ahead.
Just from my own experience. Firstly, thank you all for your great insights, as well as our inquisitive questions from our great moderator.
With the help of Professor Gisela Löhlein.
There you go, there you go. Always great to have help. My question is for the boys from Q&A. You mentioned you also have an office in Italy, and considering the China speed that I think permeated through the entire panel discussion, do you see differences between your Italian office and your work here in China in terms of your creative flow, the materials you use, your creative process, anything? Does China speed affect your work in China, and do you see a big difference in your offices between China and Italy? Just curious, I guess.
Should I start?
I think it's a long question, so you can split it into...
It's a bit long, it's a bit long, I apologize.
Yeah, exactly. So we are very aligned on this. So our mission, I would say, since we opened the office in Italy, is try to not have two offices working at two different places. We are here, and we love the way that things work for us in China, right? We actually like to work at this speed. So what we're trying to do in Italy is to sort of, also because we complain that in Italy everything is slow and everything takes a long time. So why would you go back to Italy and do exactly the same, in the same way? So we have a responsibility as designers, and I think going to clients and say like, no, actually this can be done much quicker than what usually companies do here. We can trim these things that are not necessary in the process and try to speed up things. So it's working, and so far with the projects we have, clients are very happy because they can see results much more quickly. Then of course there is a different pace in terms of implementation. The bureaucracy in Italy requires much longer times and so on. So that is what we're now figuring out, how to keep the same energy that you get from a fast project, even when the project is actually taking 1 or 2 years, right? Because it's very easy to lose the momentum when you have this sort of, and the focus when you have this sort of long delays in the process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, our office in Italy is pretty fresh. I mean, we started like 1 year and a half ago, so we are still somehow experimenting that side. With smaller projects, such as apartments or stuff like that, we had more or less the same timing as China, I have to say. Of course, when you're doing architecture, even though it's a small architecture, then you need to face this huge monster that is the bureaucracy. So you can go as fast as you can, and actually that's why those Italian clients looked for us, because they would like to use like this Chinese speed, let's call it like this. But then you will always find that wall. So for now, for example, we are doing a renovation for a small, let's call it like it's a restaurant and a guest house. Everything was confirmed from our side, from client side. I think was in May. And since May, we are waiting for for the bureaucracy to go on, and everything is there. So yeah, about that, there is honestly, right now, I see there is nothing we can do. We will do our best in the next year. Let's see if we can, but if you want to stay legal and we want to, for now, there is nothing absolutely you can do
Fair
about
enough.
that.
You brought enough China speed, and yeah, you got to
Joking, of
to
course.
the wall. Fair enough. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Yeah,
I don't know if there is any other questions.
I'll pass the microphone around if there is.
I think we're good. Anyway, our speakers, I believe they're gonna stay around for a little while. So if there's anyone shy to ask questions in front of everyone, they're, I guess, available to answer them later.
Sure.
So with this, I would like to thank you, first of all, for joining our panel today, those who are here with us, and also, of course, people in live streaming who, again, couldn't join us today on site, but I've been told that you're there following us. So I thank you, and I conclude this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.